Well, hello. It's Panu Pihkala from University of Helsinki talking with Nicole Betancourt, a noted documentary filmmaker and a creative person of many methods. We are discussing ecological grief and other feelings about the state of the world. Warm thanks for joining us, Nicole, with Climate Mental Health Network. Uh, would you like to start by telling a bit about your personal relationship with ecological grief?
Well, for me, it became really a sort of a doorway into my understanding that I am part of the earth. I became chronically ill 10 years ago and trapped in bed for many months at a time. And I started to feel like what was happening in the world around me was what was happening in my body, that there was this sort of breakdown, ongoing loss. For me, it was time to be with my family, time to work. And I felt that what was happening in the world was also a certain biodiversity, a loss of life that was happening all over the planet. And my dreams were starting to connect me to this larger world of loss. And at first, it became really terrifying, and then it became as I started to express it in paintings and in this film that I just finished called The Unfixing, and by doing video and sound installations in New York, it started to become a connection and a way that I would felt connected to the world, connected to nature, and that connection was actually a gift. So, in a way, my avoiding the pain became made it worse. And when I entered into it, which took more courage than I thought I ever had, it actually made me feel that even through loss, I was part of this planet, a sense of belonging, a sense of not just interconnection, but of being here in this beautiful planet, which is so beautiful. It's not just loss, of course, right? It's full of wonder and life and it's stunning. It's actually a miracle, it feels like sometimes. And our bodies are part of that. And it was through grief and loss that I became aware of that incredible life force that I was a part of. So
Mhm,
it became a weird gift, the grief.
mhm,
I don't know how to explain it because that interconnection ended up actually healing my body a lot
mhm,
and made me aware of how I see the world and how I see my place in the world is a source of incredible regenerative life, and that actually I felt was very small. I wasn't that as important as I thought I was,
mhm,
lying in bed staring at my ceiling, but or as I wanted to be, as I was always fighting to be, and that loss of self in a way, I don't know, self, maybe more the loss of separateness actually made me feel much larger because I was a small piece of something so magical and huge.
mhm,
And grief was the entry point to that for me.
mhm,
The parallels between chronic illness and climate change are so profound. And I think, especially with people suffering with long COVID, with long Lyme, with chronic illnesses that aren't really fixable, we're not going to, or they don't feel that way at the moment, maybe I should say. And that's why the film is called The Unfixing. It's how do we live in this uncertainty in this time where there's ongoing loss? We're not necessarily going to see how the story ends. And at the same time, there's a lack of places to express these feelings. There's a lack of communal, which is why it's so important what, the work that you're doing, Panu, because you're creating spaces for people to have these experiences in community. And I think that there's a real need for that in our culture, especially in New York City, where I'm based.
mhm. Wow, that's a lot. Thanks a lot, Nicole, for sharing that, and it connects in my mind to the teachings of also many spiritual guides who often talk about, grief bringing us back to Earth or connecting us again. And of course, the influential work that reconnects network and activities developed by Joanna Macy and colleagues, which I know that you have heard about also, that theme of reconnecting I hear strongly in your words also. And the intimate connections between beauty and also being grateful for some quite fundamental things in life. So it often goes to quite deep sort of existential or existentialist stuff, you know, how to deal with one's role in a vast universe, the sort of both the possible feelings of insignificance and finding some meaning in existence. And so there's a lot resonating with what you say. And you mentioned New York. We've talked briefly about that before, but also to all the listeners and watchers. So, what kind of arts based work did you do in New York about ecological grief?
We did. My husband's a sound designer and composer, and a dear friend of ours is a video engineer. And so the three of us got together and we created these video and sound installations in community gardens, which are gardens in New York City that were built on empty lots. So let's say there's buildings and there's like a missing space in between the buildings filled with garbage. The community comes in, they clean it out, they plant trees, they plant food, they plant all kinds of stuff, and that's a community garden. It's a piece of land that was sort of taken over by the community and repurposed for nature. And we went into those spaces and we built a video and sound installation, projected on buildings, hung screens over ponds. And as people entered the space, they were given a Joanna Macy open sentence, which said, when I think about what's happening to the natural world, what breaks my heart is. And we gave each person a flower. And then they were able to bring this flower as an offering to the sort of memorial to climate loss and the climate crisis. And people really stayed. Like it was profound. Like I felt in a way that I was creating a spiritual container for these kind of emotions that don't really have a temple or a space or a memorial in our city. And art was sort of the entry point because it was sort of beautiful and intriguing and it felt kind of mystical and people like would walk in or they'd smell the incense or see the candles lit and like these beautiful projections and they would enter into the space and then they all of a sudden were, oh wow, I can tap into these feelings here and I could just sit here with them. The art became sort of yeah, it became a container, a play. It made it okay in our cerebral, culture that we have in New York. Oh, I can go to an art thing, like I might not go to like a memorial to grieve sort of things that we think of as abstract, like the loss of trees on some other country or forest fires or the bugs living on a beach somewhere. So instead it became yeah, so just that became it was an amazing powerful thing for me to be a part of. I felt in a way that I had to learn to be able to also create space for other people's feelings, which is something that was really helpful to me as now I'm taking the film out because people come to me and they start sharing their own experiences, whether it's from chronic illness or from their climate emotions. And it's been an interesting role to play, I have to say.
Hmm.
I'm learning about myself through the process. I found that like my having a way to express how I was feeling uh, about loss of life that isn't really acknowledged. When you read newspaper articles in the New York about forest fires in California or something like that, we hear mostly about like loss of property or people's homes, which is tragic, but we don't really hear that much about what did it do to the field mice and what did it do to the bees and the birds and that beautiful flower that grows in the desert. I mean, we don't hear that much about that. And it seems abstract to us because I have grown up in a culture in New York City that really looks at nature as something to be a resource, that water is a resource for us, that plants are a resource for us. It's a form of nutrition. It's a form of even when you look at food, is like it's a resource for us to be better people. and more comfortable people or more healthy people. And it's that power over mentality. I realized is also similar with health, how we look at medicine as like, oh, I want to just, oh, I've got like a sore shoulder. I'm going to get that shoulder fixed. Okay, great. Sure. I'm not saying that's a bad thing. Of course, everybody wants to fix their shoulder if it hurts. But let's look at like how that shoulder's connected to like what happened with your grandmother last week. And like, why is that related to the shoes you were wearing? And like how you felt about, that fight with your husband or, so all those things are interconnected and it's our power over mentality. As Joanna Macy would say, like, what if you were referencing her earlier, this idea of power over versus power with, I think is so fundamental to us feeling not wanting to access our pain because we feel like, oh, we're just going to push it away, or I'm just going to manifest happiness, or I'm not going to deal with that uncomfortable feeling. And it's through the courage it takes to deal with the uncomfortable feelings that we actually end up having this incredible sort of treasure chest of things you can't even imagine until you go there.
Mm. Yeah, that's so powerful. And if anyone wants to read more books by Joanna Macy are great on this, and also the guidebook with Molly Young Brown, Coming Back to Life, features this great section about the cost of not being in touch with what is going on in the world. And it's
Mhm.
on one hand, a quite human reaction to try to turn away from suffering, but eventually that is just going to intensify the suffering. And people are going to need a lot of containment and safe spaces and community to be able to go towards the enormity of it all, and then having low threshold places like partly abandoned city spaces where there's artwork and lots of things for various senses happening. I think that's very powerful, and I think we need more experimentation of various social and community methods for encountering that. You refer to the film, The Unfixing. I've seen a version of it. It was very powerful. And when I think about ecological sorrow, types of loss and grief in ecological grief, the article, which is sort of basis for much of the campaigning we are now doing with Climate Mental Health Network, I'm especially thinking of the concepts of non-finite loss and chronic sorrow. Losses which may have an initial stronger period of crisis, but then they also keep happening or reminding of themselves. And then the resulting type of grief may be complicated grief in the sense that it's very difficult, but it's more akin to what Susan Roos is calling chronic sorrow, which is not pathological. It's just so strong because the loss is so continuing and so complex. So, would you like to speak a bit about non-finite loss, chronic sorrow, and the unfixing?
Yeah, I think that when I was really sick and my daughter was also super super sick, we were with long Lyme disease. We were in Colorado and there were forest fires, forest smoke everywhere, and like dust blowing through the air, and it just felt completely overwhelming to me. It was too much. And I ended up channeling or alchemizing the experience into creating something. So I ended up hiking into a forest that had been burnt a couple of years before and filming. It was basically to film it. I didn't leave any of the stuff there, but wrapping these ribbons around the trees, like memorial ribbons. And I was writing on them you could see them kind of blowing in the wind, and then you saw them flowing through the water. And it was this sort of sorrow being caught on the wind. I was able to create this space of mourning for myself in the film, and that acknowledgement became a kind of, and when I say alchemizing, it's like you're transforming something that may be a wound that drains you to sort of a scar that you feel is just part of your life. So it's kind of like when you talk about clean pain versus dirty pain, or the idea of the second arrow in Buddhism. So, like, if you have a pain, like you get hit by an arrow, and then all of your thoughts about that become the second arrow. It's like stabbing yourself with another arrow, right? So, and those thoughts might be like, I don't want to feel this, or oh my God, this is really bad. So part of it is acknowledging that the clean pain or the first arrow that can be a source of well, just being in the moment and being acknowledging what is. I'm always going to be sad for what's happening, and I don't think I'll ever see the end of it, because we've already lost so much. And that's just always going to be with me. It's just part of, and it doesn't mean I have to be a bummer all the time, right?
Mm,
You can experience joy and sorrow at the same time. They can both exist. And I think that was something also that I learned from Adrienne Marie Brown in the film. She's a writer and a poet and a singer, and also Octavia Butler scholar and a systems thinker. And with the way she describes it is it's about relationship. When you look at like the work of Donella Meadows, I know I'm dropping a lot of names here, but when you look at systems theory, um, it's not just about, it's how things relate, how separate things relate to each other and the patterns that they create. And looking at patterns and looking at how to be in right relationship, as Adrian describes in the film, like can you be in right relationship with what's around you? Because when like a bird that flies flocking in huge swarms through the sky, like starlings and murmurations, each bird is just paying attention to the birds around it, right? And then they find themselves flocking, right, in these huge movements. And that is a good metaphor for the concept of emergence in systems theory, which is that there's maybe hope or faith in the future that can be found in the small gestures, the small relationships that we have with ourselves, with our grief, with what's around us, and that through those connections, we will find ourselves flocking together to change the world. So it's like there's power in these small changes in your psyche actually change your body. They change your system in your body, right? If you're stressed and freaked out, then creates inflammation and lowers your immune system. But if you're sort of feeling your grief and being kind to yourself and moving through your emotions, it's actually better for your body. And what's better for your body is better for the planet, right? Because we're part of this earth, we're part of nature. So that's where all this stuff sort of interconnects. Yeah, exactly. And climate emotions aren't just like a soft thing that you have to think about, like on the side, or like just go take action. Well, actually, I disagree with that. I think how you think about the world, how you see the world, how you feel about your relationship with the world changes all of your behaviors, changes the systems that we create because it's your perspective. How do you see things? How do you see yourself in right relationship with everything? It's actually the prequel to action. It's not instead of, or it's not soft or like weak. It's actually, it takes a lot of courage.
mm. Thank you for voicing all that, and I wholeheartedly agree. And also the possible coexistence and fluctuation of joy and sorrow becomes more possible when we collectively go towards sadness and grief also. So that's one of the learnings in this process, that it enables the flow of all kinds of emotions. And speaking of alchemy, one final recommendation is the book by Miriam Greenspan, Healing Through the Dark Emotions, from early 2000s, where she uses the concept of emotional alchemy. There's great stuff about sorrow and grief there also. I think we have to stop here to keep the length of the video sort of social media friendly. Would love to continue this with you and hope we get another chance. And warm thanks, Nicole, for being part of this and especially for everything you do.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Panu. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye.